This video is going to cover my sample essay for the creative text response, and then I'll look over my statement of intention in the next video. So an overview of the piece that I'm going to share is it's first based off Kate Kennedy's Like a House on Fire. However, the techniques and structure that I'm going to share can be applied to any text. So here is a brief summary of my piece which you can pause and read. And as always, the full piece will be linked below so you can download it for free. And what I'll do, so this doesn't become an audiobook, is I recommend that you first have a read of the piece and then come back to this video for the analysis, because I won't spend time reading the entire section out. And instead, I'll jump straight into the analysis and my writing decisions, which is the part that's going to get you the marks. Alright, let's have a look at my sample essay. So first, I begin with something called a hook, which is basically something that is going to make your reader want to continue reading a piece. Now this can come in many forms, but my personal favorite is to begin with some vivid descriptions, like so. And the thing to note about this, it's very good to include figurative language, because this is what gives life to your piece. So similes, metaphors, personifications, as highlighted below. And in addition, try to have as many adjectives or adverbs as possible. It's simple, but very powerful. For example, here I said unseen messages rather than just messages. Here I said blinking screen rather than just screen, and impatiently urging rather than just urging. And even though these are just one word, having a lot of these lined up and combined together adds a lot of weight to your piece, and it makes your entire piece much more descriptive. And finally, if you're struggling for what to write, I found it helpful just to picture a scene that you want to describe, and then use a website called Descriptionari, which I covered in this video linked above, and that can help you get some inspiration for what to write. So these are the first two chunks of this piece, which you can pause and have a read. Alright, moving on, now we begin our transition to the past. And the reason I like to have so many flashbacks in my piece is because I find talking about the past is a good way to flesh out the plot without needing excessive detail. So it has more flexibility in the sense that you can jump from time to time in this overall timeline of the character's development without having to explain every single detail. And this is also where I begin to explain why my character was feeling anxious in the hook. So this is a good place to explain what your hook actually means. And another thing is related to the title. If you choose a motif like I did, which was gears, make sure to build upon it throughout your entire piece. So in this case, I mentioned how she begins to change gears or pulls the gear lever down, which represents how she's changing her mindset. So kind of like a mental gear. And again, notice the figurative language. I mentioned this a lot of times and I'll keep doing it because it does make such a huge difference. So I'll just highlight one example. And then here, I introduce the character Simon. Simon here is actually very similar to one of my author's characters. And what I'm trying to get at is that you can take similar characters to the author and put them in different settings, which is what I have done here. And just a small nuance, the word grimace, you might not pay too much attention to that word, but the reason I included this here is because in my author's text, this word showed up many times, which is why I included it to more closely mimic the author's writing style. And then also you might see some italics, and that's basically quotes from my text. Although it's not necessary, I found that this quote here in particular fit quite well. So I couldn't really find a substitute in terms of words, so that's why I included a quote here. One last thing to note about of this first memory that she recalls is that in order to maximize the power of your descriptions, it's good to consider imagery from the 5 senses. So what does the character see, feel, hear, taste, or smell? And you don't need all 5 of these, but the more the better. So in this case, I began using some olfactory imagery, which just refers to what the character can smell. So for example, breathing in the lingering taint of Simon's cigarettes. So don't fall into the trap of just describing what the character sees. Try and maximize all the 5 senses. Moving on, this memory is followed by a quick transition back into the present and then another memory. And one thing I want to point out here is the use of one-word sentences. And this adds tension and makes the writing mimic the character's thoughts more accurately. I would argue that this is also a show versus tell example. Only in this case, I'm showing you how nervous and anxious she is via the sentence structure of my piece. So definitely consider the sentence structure of your piece, because that can contribute to the overall tone and mood of your writing. And you can further see this debate and this tension in her mind by the use of hyphens here, which kind of shows that she's trying to almost correct herself in the way that she wants to think. And this transition back into the present just shows how the woman is getting more and more nervous. And note that I don't say that she feels nervous, but rather I described the things that people do when they are nervous. So things like rubbing their hands on their jeans. So look for these parts in your essay. Show how the person is nervous, rather than simply telling us that she is nervous. And then moving on to memory number 2. Here, I decide to continue to build up my fire motif. You can see in the sparks of shared memories. And on the next page, we have an abandoned campfire. I really like to include a reoccurring motif throughout my piece because it kind of strings your piece nicely together. And in your statement of intention, you can say that this is something you work to build throughout your entire piece, which shows your assessor that you've carefully considered and crafted your piece. Now, after this flashback, there's a quick jump back into the present and then another flashback. So it's a very similar structure to before. The purpose of these frequent flashbacks is to show how the weight of the past is so heavy that it takes up most of the piece, which is reflective of how it takes up most of the mental space in the woman's mind. So let's focus on the present and memory 3. And I want to note out 2 words here. Innocuous silhouette. And if you've seen my creative tips video, which is linked above if you want to see some tips related to creative writing in general, I mentioned that I preferred not to include complex or long words. And that is generally true. However, these 2 words are a bit special because they are words that the author has used over and over again. And so I tried to mimic the author's vocab. And also, you can see more fire imagery here, or the fire motif. So for example, feelings of resentment licking their way up her nerves. And this is a good sentence to use if you want to take this, which would work for any time you're describing the resentment between 2 characters. And also, I included some Australian slang or references. So for example, this section, which is referring to cricket, and also some slang here. And again, you'll find that all these decisions are related to my author. So always let the writing decisions of your author dictate how you write, because this isn't just writing a regular creative piece, it's reading and creating. So you're reading the author's piece and then creating something based off that. So that's really important. And then moving down, and then back to the drive gear. So she's about to move on when she's bombarded by a final memory. But however, something different happens this time. And this is a good sentence to use to show that your character has experienced a micro-evolution, or in other words, a turning point in their attitude, which is evident in this sentence. So the thought of this makes something click inside her head, like a flexed knuckle, as she felt this traditionalistic mindset denature. So this paints a quite descriptive image of how she is beginning to change. And you can see from this point onwards, the tone of the piece is getting more and more optimistic until it builds up to the conclusion. And if you read this paragraph, so memory number 4, and then the present below, you can find a lot of commas and conjunctions, so ands or ors. And this makes the reader read the paragraph quite quickly. And this is because when we are excited, we usually just keep blabbing on with no stop. So this is another case where the writing structure mimics the overall atmosphere of the piece. So longer sentences makes it seem like the character is more excited. Especially with a sentence like this, you can see that there's a lot of commas and ands. And then in the second last paragraph, This is where I have the woman using the manual control of the car, and this brings in the title, gears, again. And if you don't know, manual control allows the driver of a car to have more control over the car. And this reflects how the character, so the woman, now has more control over her life by moving on after her optimistic realization. And then finally, we have our ending paragraph, which brings the piece full circle, as this mirrors the starting hook, but the noticeable difference is that there is a much more optimistic vibe. And our character, in the end, pushes on the hope that the road in front of her will stretch to the horizon, indicating that she wants to carry on with her current state of content and satisfaction all the way into her new future. So when you end, try not to make your ending too perfect. And what I mean by that is not the type of happy endings that you see in movies or TV shows, but try and have some resolution, but also keeps the details of this resolution a bit unclear. And so you can see that our character progressed from being anxious to a degree of hope, which in my case was the degree of resolution that I was looking for. And on this high note, this concludes our piece and also this video on my sample essay. Any questions, leave them down below, and next we'll explore the statement of intention that accompanies this piece.